Welcome to Listenwise News Bites, where you can hear stories from the news that are specially selected for young listeners. Listenwise is an award-winning online listening skill-building resource used by teachers. We have a curated collection of more than 2,000 podcasts from sources such as NPR and other producers of high-quality audio storytelling. In this episode, the last state flag with the Confederate emblem is coming down, and how LeBron James is helping to make voting easier. And stay tuned for weird news, and you'll learn the coronavirus has its own hairstyle. First, a story about how the Mississippi legislature voted to remove the Confederate battle emblem from its state flag.
By a vote of 85 yeas and 34 nays, resolution passes.
The last state flag with the Confederate battle emblem is coming down. Yesterday, Mississippi state lawmakers cleared the way to begin the process of removing the 126-year-old flag that many see as a symbol of hate and oppression. And Republican Governor Tate Reeves said for the first time he would sign such a bill. Joining us is Mississippi's House Minority Leader, Democrat Robert Johnson. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great. I had a pretty exciting night last night, probably a little pre-celebration. We will put the rubber stamp on it by passing a bill today, but we're pretty excited. It's kind of a surreal moment, but it's great.
Yeah, I mean, you are a black man born in Mississippi. Tell me what this means to you. Growing up, what did that flag represent? And now seeing it changed, how is that going to change things for you?
Well, you know, not, even though it's obvious, I'm glad you acknowledged I was a black man growing up in Mississippi, and it seems, let me put it in this perspective. It almost seems silly in the black community that we're even having this discussion. I mean, why would you ask me to have to vote to take down something that we know is almost, arguably illegal? Why do we even have it? I grew up in a time, I'm 61 years old. I was born in 1958. So I grew up during the Civil Rights Movement. I walked and marched as a child with my parents in protest. And what that flag represents to me, when we were told when we see that flag, that means that's somebody that may hurt you, may set your church on fire, may set your house on fire, may kill you, or may have killed somebody you know. That's what it represents whenever we see that. And so it represented when I grew up. When I walked in a building in a dentist's office, there was a colored side. Literally, I'm only 61. I can remember going to the dentist, a colored side and a white side. That flag hung in offices like that, not as a state flag, but as a Confederate battle flag. And to have that on our state flag and to work and serve under that, to try to prosper and raise children under that in a state that I'm here because I want to be. I'm here because I love this state. A lot of us had opportunities to leave, left, and came back. But to do that almost seems ridiculous, and to get it done feels cleansing, feels powerful to me. And so it's a great day.
Why do you think the change was possible this time?
Money. The climate in the country that was sparked by recent events across the nation said to all of America that race relations in this state, we can take the cover off of it. It is not what it needs to be. We have a serious race problem in this state, how we understand each other, how we perceive each other. And right in the front door of this country, a glaring symbol of that stands in the state of Mississippi. And people who do business with the state, sports teams, colleges and universities said, hey, we can't be a party to that. We can't be involved in that kind of, we can't rubber stamp or endorse a system like that. We're pulling out. We may end up losing business. We certainly won't get any new business, no new jobs. And when student athletes start talking about quitting the team, a football industry, a college football industry, the SEC, where two schools in the state of Mississippi make millions, tens of millions of dollars every year on the backs of African-American athletes, and those athletes start saying, we may not play, all of a sudden people get clarity, and that's why we changed.
Mississippi's House Minority Leader Robert Johnson, thank you very much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Hearing from a black legislator in Mississippi about removing the Confederate emblem from the flag was very powerful for me. And it makes me think about what symbols might bring Americans together. What do you think? Next, a story about how the NBA is offering its large sports venues as voting locations.
Over the past month, basketball players, coaches, and teams have been the people in sports speaking out the loudest about social justice. But now they're stepping that up a notch. Multiple franchises have volunteered their facilities to serve as polling places for elections this fall. NPR's Miles Parks has more.
Renee Montgomery is well acquainted with Atlanta's State Farm Arena. It's where her WNBA team, the Atlanta Dream, play their home games.
Three-pointer for Renee Montgomery. Pumps it up and in, and a four-point play opportunity. Scoops it to Montgomery. 7, yes! Boy, is she dialed in or what?
This fall, however, she won't be using the arena. Voters will.
You know, there was a problem there and a need there.
With 4 months left to go until the election, officials across the U.S. are frantically searching for places that are centrally located and big enough to allow voters to socially distance. 3 NBA teams, Atlanta, Detroit, and Milwaukee, stepped up this week to volunteer their spaces. The arenas could be game changers for a number of reasons. Montgomery noted that Atlanta's transit system runs directly to her team's home court.
People can't get to the polls. So when you talk about arenas, you talk about different places like that, well, now you have public transit that can get there.
In Atlanta, hundreds of stadium staff will also be trained as poll workers, which could solve another voting problem that the pandemic has created.
You can only have so many polling sites as you have people to work them.
That's Josh Douglas, an election law professor at the University of Kentucky. Election officials in Lexington successfully turned that school's football stadium into a voting center for the state's primary last week. Douglas said training stadium employees means election officials can allocate poll workers to other voting sites.
Not only do they have the size capacities, but theoretically they have workers who know the space. And if we can get them trained, as long as they're younger and healthy and not as high risk, that allows election officials to have more flexibility in the number of polling sites they can open.
LeBron James's new voter outreach organization, More Than a Vote, has been big in pushing for the idea. And overall, the initiative represents another step in basketball's growing influence in politics. More than 80% of the NBA's players are people of color. Atlanta Hawks coach Lloyd Pierce said the league's growing political voice is linked to the activism happening elsewhere in the country.
All of these things are starting to intertwine. Someone may talk about being a black player or a black person in America. Then it gets intertwined with how it affects them politically, how it affects them economically, how it affects them via education. And so how can you not speak on this?
I asked Montgomery, the Atlanta Dream player, about whether she thought this year's focus on politics and basketball would be temporary, either driven by the pandemic or the protests or even President Trump. She said no. She's planning to sit out the shortened WNBA schedule this year to focus on highlighting social issues and working on voter outreach. She expects this to be the new normal in sports.
Athletes are going to feel that their voice matters. A lot of times athletes were timid about speaking out because if you speak out and the team doesn't like it because the corporate sponsors don't like it, now you're in trouble. Well, that excuse can't really be there anymore.
Pierce said the same thing, that basketball players will stay vocal even after 2020. When you give someone a platform, he said, you can't just take it away. Miles Parks, NPR News.
It's interesting to hear how helpful it will be to have sports stadiums as voting locations. They'll be easy to get to and large enough to be socially distant. What else might be done to make voting more accessible, especially during a pandemic? And now it's time for some weird news. Can your hairstyle raise public awareness? Some think the new coronavirus style can.
Good morning, I'm Rachel Martin. Every era has its own hairstyle, and the coronavirus age may now have one of its own. The Guardian reports a once popular style for girls in Kenya is seeing a resurgence. Braided spikes, which just happen to resemble the coronavirus molecule. Apparently, the hairstyle is pretty affordable, which is nice in these financially austere times. One mom said 50 Kenyan shillings is a good price for a hairstyle that also helps raise public awareness.
Thanks to our partner, NPR, and to Scott Holmes for our theme music. That's it for the Listenwise News Bites podcast this week. For more stories from the news selected for young listeners, go to www.listenwise.com and sign up for free. And subscribe to this podcast for our weekly shows. Happy listening.